Ken, you're very welcome to the Creative Souls of Clare podcast. I think this is one of the physically closest podcasts I'm likely to do online. You're living down the road from me, I believe. We only discovered recently.
I didn't absolutely. I know the house well that you're living in. So I figure about 500 meters as the crow flies. So we'll have to hook up for a glass of wine at some point.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing what the virtual world. I mean, I've ended up doing these online obviously because the obvious elephant in the room being COVID, but they've also given me this kind of broader reach that I hadn't thought about before, which is, I now get video as well as the audio. I don't have to worry about setting up video cameras. But I was on to somebody else this morning in the US, and then someone else in Australia, and but yet you don't know your neighbor down the road. So anyway, we'll get to meet up at some point soon.
Modern living for you. I mean, I know my neighbors are farmers, and they'll tell you that they hardly meet anybody because that's just the way community has gone. So yeah, every effort you can make is always great and rewarding, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's just like a COVID type issue in terms of not knowing your neighbors, because I think that was happening to our society before anyway, wasn't it?
I think so. It's the kind of Western dream, isn't it, to have a lovely big house and big TV and not be bothered by anyone. But you have to, we all have to live in a community, and we're social species, I think. And, every effort you make to meet somebody always pays dividends. I think, try to, in as much as you can. And I don't know, just do your best, really. Don't want to beat yourself up about it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we don't appreciate community until we need it, in your more vulnerable moments.
Isn't it funny, when I had kids and I see other people having kids, and suddenly you start hearing these terms in conversation about sense of community. You're kind of a selfish 20-something, and you just want to get away and hang out with your mates, but then suddenly you realize, because I suppose, as somebody said, it takes a community to rear a child, and but we're very lucky in Ireland. We have a great sense of community, particularly in rural areas and in the West, that that isn't there in lots of other places, because people like to get into big houses as they will get more affluent and kind of push other people away from them. But of course, I know I don't want to talk too much about COVID, but we've never realized how much we need people as when we couldn't have company during COVID. So people are everything to us. For me, and anyway, that's how I feel.
And that you mentioned there, like, about your 20s, when you want to you don't necessarily, maybe you want a different form of community. You want a community full of crack and travel and breaking, particularly for me anyway, being from a very small town in the Northeast. You want to break out of the small town, and you want to go and see what's away. You want to break out of your community and see what other types of community there are. But I'm conscious that, where you live now is not your home place as such, where you were born and bred. Can you talk to me about what your early days were like and where you grew up and how it might have shaped you?
Yeah, so I'm from Ennis, very proud of where I come from Drumbiggil Road in Ennis, County Clare, and I grew up there. I had a lovely time. Come from a big family. I'm the youngest of 8, and there was always lots of people around the house, and I loved it. And my father came from Fenit Island, which is a tiny island on the northwest side of Tralee Bay, and he spent a lot of my summer days there. And I had two uncles and an aunt living there, and life there hadn't changed much since the 19th century, apart from electricity and mechanization on the farm. Their whole attitude to life was as had been in the 19th century, some for not so good, but a lot of it for very fantastic stuff, the appreciation of culture and poetry and community and how they spoke about people. And I still have a cousin down there, Anna Moore, who's 94, who will tell you everybody that's ever been related to us, who they married, what their children did. Beautiful sense of community and connection in a non-intrusive way. But you mentioned the small town. The 1980s Ireland was utterly depressing. I felt stifled. I couldn't get out of it fast enough. I finished college at 20 and got on the next plane to New York to play in a band. It was awful. We've forgotten about the awful influence of the institutions and the church and Anne Lovett having her baby in the schoolyard. I have 3 daughters who are, late teenagers now. I try to explain that to them, how wonderful it is now compared to what it was. And of course, we have a long way to go in so many ways. And equal rights for women and all that stuff, but it's come so far, and it's good to look back sometimes too. But I couldn't wait to get out of the place. But of course, many of those issues are your own. You know, it's a repeated theme in literature and with artists. You know, I ran away, and then I discovered it was me I needed to get away from, and me I needed to come to terms with. And I don't think that's any different for a lot of people. But I know lots of people who didn't, who live in the same road they were born on, and are the most interesting, rounded, connected people ever. But it's just, that wasn't me, and I couldn't be them. You have to just be yourself.
Yeah, I sometimes envy people that sort of never left their square mile, and they know every inch of it, they know every person, they know the history, and they're perfectly content. They don't need to go sun themselves abroad. They just have a sense of peace and peace and tranquility without any grasping. And like, that's ultimately what we're all looking for at some level.
Look, absolutely. It's funny you should say that, because I feel the same, and it is a stereotypical thing you see in movies. You know, it's the classical New York or Brooklyn neighborhood. You know, the guys that never left and they're blood brothers and that. I'm envious. It can be a large stereotype as well, but as I said, you can only be yourself, and that wasn't for me. But it's lovely to reconnect with, you know, guys you were in school with, and yeah, and social media is good for that. I mean, I've reconnected with so many people on Facebook that I just wouldn't have come across otherwise. And,
yeah,
and that can be really nice. I mean, I think there's no replacement for actually meeting people, you know, in the world, in the flesh. But social media has helped on that. Yeah.
So it's hard to get away from what you said there about jumping on a plane to New York to join a band. Who doesn't want to know about that? But before we get to that, I just want to ask briefly what you were up to in college and what you studied, and where was that?
Well, I studied computing, but I was actually electronics technician was the name of the course in what's now the much posher name of Limerick Institute of Technology. When I was there, it was just called Moyleash, which was the local name. But yeah, I did it because my mother kind of more or less made me. Not that she was an overbearing woman, but you know, she's very subtle and discreet. And of course, you know, it was the coming thing back in the 80s, computing and technology. And I'm very glad I did. I mean, I hated it, you know, but then I hated school from, you know, I went to junior infants down in the convent in Ennis. I wet my pants in the first hour to try and get home, but Sister Malachy was too clever. She had a spare pair. And from that day to the day I finished college, I mean, college was grand, but I just hated the confinement of school. Yeah. And you know, the learning never suited me, that kind of learning. So
yeah.
What did you ask me again? So about how we got this? Yeah, so I studied that, and then later, after, you know, the music didn't work out, I had to get a real job, and I worked in technology for many years, and you know, it gave me a good living, and I got to see the world. I was very grateful to have that background.
So the fact that you maybe didn't enjoy or ease into formal education, I mean, I would identify with that to a large degree, but it would be very common for adventurous type people or creative people. Not that, you know, everyone isn't creative, but a lot of artists in particular, or writers or musicians, whatever, they, like the ones I know anyway, a lot of them just couldn't cope with school at all. And it's because there was a certain type of definition of intelligence or education, and it wasn't that they were any less brighter, they just didn't conform in that sense.
Oh, I mean, it was awful, you know. I mean, I had a friend of mine who was an artist, pardon me, and I can remember him in second and third class being beaten day after day because he couldn't get his tables. You know, he used to do the 2 and the 4 and the 5 and the 10 times tables. And I remember saying it to him, you know, why don't you just learn it? And I remember he was crying, saying, I did it for an hour with my father last night. You know, he was a brilliant artist, creative. I'm like, he couldn't, you know, but the school system couldn't accept at that time that you know, people were different. And God, I mean, all the people that had, you know, what we would now describe as being on the spectrum, which all of us are, I think, to a greater or lesser degree. But I mean, it was beat into them in my generation, you know. If they didn't, if it was rote learning, and yeah, it was awful. It was awful. But you know, we rebelled against it. I mean, I know I shouldn't say this, but in later years, I'm proud of it. We petrol bombed school when I was 12. Because, you know, we had this headmaster who was an absolute sadist, and we didn't know what we were doing. There was no damage, by the way. It was just a wall, right? One of the kids figured out what to make.
You did need sort of clarify there.
Sorry, we didn't blow.
This podcast could suddenly go legal here. I'm going to have to get the lawyers to go on.
I only wish the principal were alive to take me on in court. But anyway, that's another story. There was no damage. It was quite harmless, I suppose. But we got the fright of our lives. But I often wondered how we did it. And it's only later years, of course, you know, when you're being beaten up every day in school. And, you know, I used to say for years I didn't mind the beatings. It was the humiliation. But of course I mind the beatings. You know, when you're 11 years old and a grown man beats you up and makes you cry in front of all your mates, I mean, that's just awful. How they can go home in the evenings. And anyway, I digress. And I don't want to make it all about that because I've made my peace with that as much as I can. And so, you know, creative people and adventurous people find it difficult. Of course, the confinement of the classroom is pretty awful. You know, I have a lot of teachers in my family, and I have a lot of friends who are teachers, and I know that certainly primary school, which is way more important in my mind, is very different these days, and they focus on lots of different stuff, and you know, growing things and the outdoors and connecting with nature and all of that stuff, and they're far more gentle people.
I think there is a wave of change, as in all areas of society, and obviously you'll always get progressive teachers as well in the mix, don't you?
Yeah, you're always going to have a mix. I mean, we had one teacher, Mr. McDermott, who was just a saint, you know. I mean, he used to read us Walter Mackin. I can still see him reading us these Walter Mackin stories on a Friday afternoon, and you know, you could hear a pin drop. It was just incredible, and he taught us, you know, art and creative stuff and reading, and you know, started the school band, and you know, we all remember those great teachers, as you know, like Robin Williams and Dead Poets Society, that kind of thing, who were just inspirational. And you'll always have people like that. But I just think there's a greater portion of people like that probably these days, and we understand a lot more about the psychology of education and children.
Yeah,
thankfully,
yeah. So let's go to New York. Ken, take me to New York.
God. So yeah, I was 20. College course was only 2 years in those days as electronics technician. So I played in bands since I was about 16, and you know, growing up in Ennis, we had so much music. I mean, we all, you know, traditional music, we just took that for granted. You know, the Flags used to be on in those days, and it was incredible. But no, rock and roll was just enticed me. I found it intoxicating, evocative, and just to play in a band. I'd still say there's no greater buzz or high to play in a rock band on stage. You know, if it's going well and you have a good audience, it's just the greatest thrill. I mean, to play any music if you can, and not that I was a great musician or anything. I was kind of middling, but so yeah, I went to New York, and I, you know, spent 2.5 years. I did just about every job. You know, I drove a truck, Big John's moving for about almost 2 years, moved furniture around Manhattan, $5-6 an hour, and swept streets in Connecticut for $5 an hour. We were all illegal in the 80s. We didn't have a choice. And I can remember being on a truck one day, and there were 5 of us from Ireland. You know, there was a guard on leave of absence, a guy who just finished medical college, an industrial engineer, a fitter, and myself. And I just finished electronics, and that was it. We were all the same. There was 100,000 Irish people left in about under 2 years, and you know, we thought it was great at the time, but of course it wasn't. But anyway, so yeah, we had a band, and we were kind of doing okay. We were a 3-piece band. My friend Tom O'Cahy, we played before we left Ireland, and he'd gone ahead. We got a gig in a place called CBGB's, which was kind of, you know, the place in New York at the time. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say the word shithole, because that's exactly what it was. But anyway, Blondie had started out there, and the Ramones had gotten really big, and Talking Heads, a lot of those early 80s bands. And we had a Colombian drummer, James Ardenza, and yeah, they used to give you these tryout gigs, you know, and if you were any good, then you'd get a gig there some other night, and we fancied our chances. And but 3 days before our gig, our drummer disappeared, and we never saw him again. And, we heard he was locked up for something or other, even though he was a lovely guy when we knew him, some old charge anyway. So it just took the heart out of us, and we decided, you know, we'd given New York enough at that stage. And the music scene was pretty awful in New York, to be honest. It was heavy metal and incredible jazz, and very little else. So we decided to go to London, and on the way to London, my buddy Tom got waylaid, and he decided to stay in Ireland. So found myself in Wembley with an Aer Lingus had broken my guitar on the way home. So I found myself with a broken guitar as a bass player, a middling singer, thinking, right, do I start again? I'm like nearly 23. So yeah, I had to get a real job, and worked in IT, and there you go. I spent a lot of years doing that. End of the dream. But I played in the band. I must tell you, I worked in the city on trading floors for 7 years in London. people think I'm a raging capitalist now, but we were the IT guys who got paid fairly well, but nothing compared to the traders and the owners.
Yeah.
And we had a band at one stage, there were 5 of us, right? And they were all heartbroken musicians who hadn't made it. And this was our kind of small amount of solace that we play once a week or once a fortnight in one of the pubs in the city, and all our mates come and they're all in pinstripe suits and everything. But yeah, they're all heartbroken guys who just had to get real jobs, as most musicians end up that way, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it also it kind of brings up this notion as to how do you define, or what do you define make it as, and does that have to be the aspiration for music, that is not okay to just play once a week for the crack and enjoy your music?
Absolutely, and that's the thing, you see, when you're 20, and yeah, I never wanted to be famous or a rock star or anything. I just wanted the notion that I could play music for a living and write songs and be creative and actually do that as my job was what enticed me, as well as obviously the power of the music. But yeah, and I'm getting as much out of music now, just playing on my own and sometimes play with some mates. I'm getting as much out of it possibly as I ever did. But yeah, but when you're when you're 20 and 21 and you have all that energy for a rock band, and it's very it's very evocative, and it's just a fantastic scene. But then, here's Bob Dylan at 80 years of age, brought out one of his best albums ever.
There you go.
Price was big anymore.
You're only a young fella, Ken.
I've only 30 years to go.
So tell me about the trading floor and the financial world and all the adrenaline and like, is it as intense as sort of, like, I suppose I'd only know it from movies, that kind of raw madness of...
It's probably very exaggerated, to be honest. But I mean, I worked for a computer company called Wang, who were big in Ireland actually in the 80s, and then they just one day sent me to one of their clients, and happened to be a stockbrokers, and I got on really well with the people. And after a year or two working with them, they offered me a job, actually working directly. And yeah, I mean, I was the main technology guy for 110 traders for about 2 or 3 years, so it was very intense. But like any job, you get to know it and you get on top of it. And when you're 25, you think, this is amazing, it's a buzz, I'm getting good money, I can go on holidays. And actually looking back on it, it was probably quite hedonistic. It was just work. I mean, slavery. Yeah. The last summer I was in London, this sounds incredible, but it's true. From January to June, I had 3 weekends off. You get a day, they give you a Tuesday off or a Wednesday off. But it was just incredibly intense. And our building actually got bombed by the IRA at one stage. Back in the 90s, and I mean, that just killed us. It took us, 2.5 years of slavery to recover the company and rebuild. We woke up one Saturday morning with 4 computers for a company with 300 people, but it was incredible. And whatever we say about Brexit and the British, really did it. There was a real wartime effort feeling. We had a director who was quite older and come through the war, and really inspired people to work and not to give in to this and to work. And as an Irish person, that was quite odd for me to be in the middle of that situation. But yeah, I digress. The spirit was fantastic. Just something to mention as an aside.
What was that like as an Irish person the next day or the next week going in, and what was the general mood?
Well, I should have been killed because the IT people, the time that you would do a lot of your work would be Friday nights and the weekend when everybody was gone home. And 3 out of every 4 Friday nights I was in the computer room, and I just happened to be on a training course that week. And if I had been, got into the computer room a few days later. The glass on these buildings was about 3 or 4 inches thick, and this small room was just covered in 6-foot pieces of those. I would have been just killed stone dead. What was it like? It was fine. People were so nice. People were possibly even compensating. And I was lucky. I never felt too much of that kind of anti-Irish stuff. And I used to get a little embarrassed sometimes. The guys who worked in the post room, many of them were Irish because they didn't have the benefit of the education that I had. You know what I mean? They were older people, and I felt really bad for them. I mean, that's a bit crass to say too, but I always got on really well in 2 different companies that I worked. You know what I mean? Now they listened to a lot of shite in the 1970s and in earlier bombing campaigns and anti-Irish stuff that the tabloids just generated. And sadly, I have so many great English and British friends. They just don't understand the situation, because how could they? If you read the history curriculum, it makes it out that they came over here and converted the savages into civilization. So it was fine. A lot of my friends at that time were English, and I had an English girlfriend for a long time, and it was fine. I probably felt I had to work a little bit harder to compensate a little bit for that, but I always did, and I always was conscious that keeping up the side and keeping up the name, and you know what I mean, that I wouldn't be, that I would just carry myself with self-respect, broadly, Sorry, I digress a little bit.
And how long did that career or work continue, Ken? And at what point did you start to show signs of restlessness?
Well, I just had to get out of London one day, and thankfully I managed to do it in an orderly fashion. But so I came back to Ireland in about 2001, and started kind of snorkeling here. First of all, I'd learned to dive in Australia, and then just started to see this beautiful hypnotic underwater world that was totally new to me, and that had never really been documented in Ireland, other than Eamon de Butler and Clare van Gelderen, which back in the 70s and 80s did amazing work. But and I just felt it coming on. I really wanted to document this and tell stories, and pardon me, very naively said, "Oh, you know what? I'll make a documentary." And if we knew what was ahead of us all the time, we wouldn't take challenges on. So it was over the course of maybe 4 years, that I tried to learn the craft of camera work, of filmmaking, of editing, of all that stuff, and to become a full-time filmmaker. And it was very, very difficult, and probably went full-time, made my first film in between 05 and 07, and then got my first TV commission in 09. And yeah, so that's what I've been doing since then, and it's been awfully difficult at times. Not so much, I mean, the work is intensely difficult, but the financial side of it at times is just off the scale. Touch wood, we're okay at the moment, and hopefully that will continue. So there wasn't a point where I just jumped ship, and you really have to kind of, like 3 daughters, you have to kind of think about these things and take your decisions wisely, and see if, dip your toes in if it will work. But at some point you have to jump off the cliff too, and thankfully it's gone okay. Yeah.
There must have been times in those early days, as there are for so many people, where you're put up against the wall and you have to really question the path, particularly then if you're rearing a family and so on, like that. There might be times when you're thinking, is this actually going to work out?
Oh, sure, it's terrifying, I mean, it's grand if you're in your 20s, or if you just have yourself to mind, you can get by some way or another. Well, not easily, of course, but if you've got kids, it's just terrifying, you know what I mean? There's nothing in the bank, and do you know what I mean? And then when we had a good start. We got did a 6-part series for TG Cahar as my second project, and that went really well. But then after that, we found it impossible to get any work. For 2 years, I tried to get a film funded, and couldn't. I got refused by 17 broadcasters in 14 countries, and as well as the Irish Film Board and everybody else who I thought might have helped. But and at the end of 2 years, you're exhausted emotionally, you're broke, and you haven't made a film, and that's really tough. But managed to get a commission from RT then back around 2012 and 2013, and thankfully we've had a good run with them since then, and done a lot of work for BBC, Natural History Unit, and other broadcasters around the world. And touch wood, it's gone okay. But no, so the worst part for me was actually when I felt I was already established, but I simply just couldn't get any other work. And I think we're okay at the moment. The whole paradox of all of this is that the world has never wanted so much content, be that music, film, drama, documentary, and yet it's so difficult. There's so many production companies competing. Broadcaster budgets have never been lower. The Netflix is just to try and get in the door of some of the streamers. If you can manage it, it can be incredible. But I know there's a lot of money being spent, but there's never been so much consumed, and there's never been so much content consumed for free. By which I mean music in particular. I mean, artists are hit so badly, and people just say, "Oh, can you send me a stream for this?" As if it's just something to be given away. We're now in the 2nd or 3rd generation of and I'm not criticizing young people, but who pay for almost nothing. I'm sorry, I listen to Spotify, but that doesn't pay musicians. It's a fraction. The idea that you can just get any movie you want or any documentary by just searching for a stream that someone has put up illegally, and behind that there are creative people who have put years in some cases, in our cases, years into something to make it, and somebody just thinks, oh, there's no reason why. I've got texts from people, why isn't your film available? I think it's really bad that your film isn't available for me to watch. Anyway, sorry, don't get me going.
I think that's it's partially like a cultural issue and partially an education and then a transition time, because like it's changing a lot in recent years. So I've direct experience of this in terms of, well, firstly, I have 2 separate podcasts. Now, they're not my full-time work by any means, but I am self-employed in wider work. But, people listen to podcasts primarily for free, and, you spend your time doing it and so on. Now, this one is a little bit supported, at least the promotional side, from Creative Ireland. And my other one, it's called Love and Courage. I have about 20 people that chip in every month. Now, mostly very small amounts, but some a little bit more. And it all adds up. And then I go spend most of that money to enrich billionaires to put it onto all their platforms. But then my wife, Susan, now released an album this year. And we really, we knew it was going to go on Spotify and Apple and all these places. And we didn't have any financial expectations. But tens of thousands of euro go into making albums. If you want to do it right, you want to pay musicians, you want to pay studio time, you want to pay CD manufacturer and promotion, all that. But we put it up on Bandcamp also, and we were very clear, like, that people could enjoy the physical product as well, even though we know people don't use CDs for the most part. But we were also pleasantly surprised by the growing culture of people starting to realize that the artist needs to get something back to put into the kitty. Now, at this point, it's still only a fraction of the sum total, but I think there's also like an onus on us to gently make our case and also educate rather than to condemn as well. But I think if we're going to do condemning, like, certainly like the guy who owns Spotify, like he's off buying football clubs or whatever, pay your bloody artists. They're the ones making the cash. Anyway, there's a lot of ranting going on here, but like it is a real issue, isn't it?
Well, I agree. There's no point, condemning people, and I always think you've got to bring people with you in education and awareness. But I know your theme, Rory, is creativity and exploring issues around that and exploring creativity. But I mean, maybe we, and I include myself, don't realize how much creativity is in our daily lives. I mean, I'm sure 3/4 of people on the entire planet listen to music every day or sing a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or watch TV or TV drama or documentary. All of that comes from creativity, from somebody just looking at a blank piece of paper or something, or closing their eyes and dreaming something up. And like all producers in the world, be they farmers or whatever, of course, they get exploited and they don't get paid enough. And it's a battle that people need to fight, however gently or suggestively we should do that is something else, but it's a battle that should be fought, that creative people need to get, and that to make the world aware that how much we depend on creativity. I mean, there's creativity in science. If you took a Panadol today, or if you took any form of medication, you put on sun cream, Fleming stared at the fucking stuff growing in his sink and thought, hang on, something interesting going on there. There is creativity in science that has great, developments that are of benefit to humanity. So, it's a better way to view creativity. And a friend of mine said once, he's a brilliant filmmaker, and he said one of the problems with creative people is that they must create, and that makes them open to exploitation. That if you're an artist or a songwriter, you have to do it, or you have to give everything to do it, and that opens you to exploitation. And creative people, it is a stereotype, but it's not necessarily an accurate stereotype. But many creative people aren't particularly clued into finances and to the business side and to be.
I think that it's a useful way to frame it, Ken, is the exploitation sense, and conversely within that, I think any kind of labor force, like, in order to win any battles for recognition and due reward, in some ways it needs to collectivize and unionize and have some kind of common voice, like to actually, because I do know that there a lot of moaning goes on as well, right? and that's natural, it's therapeutic, but it's also useless unless we actually bring it somewhere and bring it to the man, if you like.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Oh God, no, no, I cut off negativity as much as I can because it's a little bit therapeutic, but only if you're the one doing the moan, if you're the one listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just something to bring as a team, in as much as you can. And you're right
Yeah.
about how you deliver it is another thing, but it's a theme that needs to be talked about more. And
Yeah.
you know, I know artists who talk to me about, you know, when there were schemes in some countries that subsidize people heavily, that, oh, you know, it didn't always necessarily work. It's not about money, and if you have to really, you know, you've got to fight for your living to a large degree too. And you know, like great art or great music sometimes comes from just the strife of having to try so hard, or pain that you've gone through. And that's, you know, what gives sometimes the best creativity and the best articulation.
It's such a tricky area. It really is. And like, you know, you're clearly someone that's had to dig very deep to bring forth what you're bringing forth into the world now. And in many ways, that makes it even more special. But the thing is, you don't want to like overly romanticize or glorify that struggle that you know, like that maybe because not everyone can withstand that struggle. Like it can break up marriages and it can cause health issues. And, you know, even right now, I'm just reading reports that divorce rates are up, divorce applications are up 30%. Now, there's probably a COVID context in the mix there. But I'm off the view that life doesn't need to be always that difficult. I do believe that suffering is part of life in many ways, but it doesn't need to be such a part of life. So I don't know, like the artist journey is a fascinating. I guess that's what we're kind of here to talk about. And how can one honor oneself as an artist, but still have dignity and a livelihood, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I consider myself an artist as a documentary filmmaker. I think I'm always trying to push the boundaries of creativity in the context of, you know, if it's a broadcast documentary or a theatrical documentary, you know, we're always trying to grow. I mean, you know, if you're not growing, you're dying. There's no place in between.
Yeah.
But so your point about how difficult it is, I mean, you know, I agree. Life has to be difficult at times, and you know, you have to be outside your comfort zones. And sadly, there are lots of consequences on a personal level to these things that happen. And you know, where's the happy balance? I don't know. I mean, I make my documentaries about the natural world, and you know, it would be nice to think that wild animals have this lovely, happy balance, but I don't think they do. I think they have an awful lot of stress in their lives. You know, if you're constantly trying to feed yourself and feed your young and watching out for predators, you know, the natural world is brutal, utterly
Yeah.
brutal. Talk about dolphins. I mean, dolphins, bottlenose dolphins are the most brutal animals in the world. You know, they engage in gang rape and infanticide, and you know, so the idea that, you know, you can find a lovely balance, I think it's more a privilege to have found that than, you know, than not. And I think we both agree that, you know, sometimes creativity comes from the pain and suffering that you have to go through. And how much of that, I don't know, is the answer that question you posed. How much should we have to take and not take, and at what personal cost is it allowable? Because you can't necessarily manage these things. You can't say that's enough now, you know.
Yeah. And then
you've got to finish a project, or you've got to get funding, or you've got to support kids and stuff, you know.
yeah, and every road is different. Every personal journey is different in that regard, isn't it? Like, and I'm conscious of, you know, the people that, I mean, I think it was chatting to Luca Bloom or somebody recently that brought up the comparison of somebody that gets up at 6 a.m. to commute for 2 hours into a job that they don't necessarily like in order to kind of do well by their family and so on. And their journey isn't any lesser or better than anyone else's, but they might be writing poems on the side or whatever it is. Like and you did your, you know, your other career at a certain point. Maybe, you know, we have different times in our life when we engage at a different level, or we go deeper than at other points.
Oh, look, absolutely. Of course you do. And, we all go through our life phases and biorhythms or whatever else it is. And we're lucky to be able to do it. And, I sometimes meet Luca in the morning with swim. I go for swimming in the beach in Lahinch every morning, which I'm very fortunate to be able to do. And I meet a lot of people, and it's something I always say, and some people say to me, my God, aren't we blessed to have this, And I often say, my God, we could be in traffic on the M50 or in the flipping tube in London as I was for 8 years, absolutely blessed to be able to do that. But these are all parts of our journey and inspire us in different ways, or don't. I mean, I've had very barren periods in my life where I haven't created anything. And
Yeah.
I think there's a darkness. I think you alluded to it earlier on, Rory, but I think creativity is in everybody. It's absolutely there. And if that's something as, I don't know, basic is the wrong word, but something as common as conversation, and conversation can be an incredible art form. The old people, particularly, my parents, my aunts and uncles out on the island, conversation was an art form with them, and how they would listen to you and know when to talk and when not to talk. I mean, I felt like a newborn foal and all around the place. You just never knew. You felt you never knew when was the right time to say something or not. But to come back to the point of it, that I think creativity or an articulation is possibly another way to describe the creative process. You're articulating something is in all of us to a greater or lesser degree, and we have an innate need to do that.
Yeah, I mean, look at probably the biggest act of creativity is to be born, like making a child, or growing food, or making, as you said, like an invention or something. Like the innate human desire and need and compulsion to create something. We're always creating. But I maybe that's maybe it's an issue that and maybe I'm contributing to it in this podcast by shining a light on people that I might call artists, but they're just people. And, maybe we need to stop kind of making artists out to be so special. And well, I suppose that's what I also am trying to do, is say, Ken, you're not so special. You've heard it here first.
Well, I can tell you, Rory, you certainly wouldn't be the first person to say that to me. And I try to say it to myself all the time. But anyway, it's a great point. No, absolutely. And that, it's a wonderful thing about, it's not just Irish Society. Irish Society you're probably familiar with, but the great thing about having mates is they don't let you get ahead of yourself. You know what I mean? It's like it's wonderful, and to be reined back. And maybe I don't know what label or how you want to describe creative people, but we should acknowledge people that are doing something like that, which is different, but without being overly focusing on it, because it's a job. And I mean, I heard Nick Cave saying that the benefits of working 9 to 5, but that's what he does. He said, and of course it's a routine, it's a schedule, and when you have children, you realize how important the simple basics are of being fed, having slept enough, and having clean clothes on you, being washed. The very simple basics. But to come back to you said about creating life, I mean, when you have children, what could possibly be greater than bringing new life into the world? Every species exists. I study animals. Every species exists insofar as we can see for two reasons: to feed and nourish ourselves, and to reproduce. And what could be a greater thing? And so yeah, I've never actually thought of having children as being creativity, but of course it is. It's you're creating new life forms and watching them develop. And if we didn't, that would be the end of the world to a degree. But anyway, yeah. Sorry, I digress again.
No, I specialize in digression. It's all good. So take me into the sea now, Ken, because the one thing that comes to mind is I think there's a timely but perhaps massively overdue awakening around a consciousness of our relationship to the sea, and the fact that most of the planet is blue, and that it's in peril, and that we need to kind of get with the program in terms of our relationship to it, whether it be through food or transport or whatever else is going on there. But it strikes me that your work in this area is hitting a mark at a really important, critical time. Do you have that sense?
Oh, I hope so. I mean, I'm not so, I don't think I'm so specialist to think that I'm the only person doing it, or but yeah, I mean, there's great awareness, and we seem to be on a bit of a crescendo at the moment and riding a wave in terms of the awareness. And a lot of that is down to documentaries. You know, I heard
Absolutely, it is. Yeah.
you know, the Blue Planet too, but I heard a famous protest singer whose name is just after escaping me, Bob Dylan's ex-girlfriend, who I'll think of in a second, one of the great 60s and 70s protest singers, and
Joan
saying about,
Baez. No, did he go out?
Joan Baez, and she was asked, somebody said about, you know, what about now? Where are the protest singers? And she said, I think documentary filmmakers are today's protest singers.
Yeah.
It is a wonderful form to get ideas like that across. Now, you know, you have to get your audience, but so to come back to the sea and what the sea is and what it gives us, I mean, it gives us everything, and there's nothing more profound than you know, my father always told me, without the sea, my family wouldn't have survived the famine. They lived on a tiny island, and they were able to supplement their diet to the extent that my father, when I was a child, showed me this big steel pot that was broken, only a little bit left, and he said, your great grandmother, great grandmother, I suppose, and during the height of the famine, they would kill a sheep or kill a lamb once or twice a week, and people would come from the mainland out to the island. Now, it's a tombolo that you can walk out when the tide is out, to feed them, because they had enough food to get by and enough food to give away to help people at the worst of the famine. But they also didn't get blight, which is just a kind of a symptom of being on it. Because if you think of blight comes on the wind, and for wind-borne spores to make it to a tombolo or an island, you would have to have an easterly wind, which you would never have, or almost never, in when potatoes are in bloom in June and July. And I know, Maharees Islands, which are close by, they didn't. It's documented there, but it's my feeling they didn't have it. So this without the sea, I wouldn't be here, because it allowed my family to feed and nourish themselves for hundreds of years, 250 years on the island. But the sea gives us everything. It's we all know, I think at this stage, half of the world's oxygen comes from phytoplankton in the ocean. Most of our water, I think you can argue, comes from the ocean via the rain cycle. Huge proportions of people on the planet are fed by the sea. What enjoyment it gives us from leisure and ecotourism and all the people swimming now and surfing and diving and all that. Yet, I put the argument out there, when we say all those things, what we're actually saying is we're talking about ourselves. We're not talking about the ocean. We're saying we should save the ocean because it gives us all these things. What about the hundreds, thousands of billions of other species of life that exist, whose habitats and whose ability to make a living we're destroying? And what about the rest of the planet and all the animals that are on land that because of the damage to the sea and everything else that's happening, and climate change and ocean acidification and rising sea levels, all the other elements that would be impacted. So the question is, do we have a moral or ethical responsibility, without being too righteous, to all the other life on the planet, not just to save the sea for ourselves? And I think the answer to that is obvious, really. But to come back to what you're saying about the damage in the ocean, one of the problems with the ocean is that it's so inaccessible, so we don't see the damage. So, if you take something like the industrial fishing practice of bottom trawling, where fishermen drag these huge, what they call barn doors, big steel things across the seabed to scrape everything comes up into the water column, and then it's captured by nets that are as wide as a football field. Some bottom trawlers haul 4 of those nets at any point in time. They get everything. They destroy the habitat, right? Research out late last year, bottom trawling releases as much carbon into the atmosphere annually as airline travel. Can you imagine that? As well as destroying the habitat, they're putting as much carbon into the place as all the airline travel, right? Here's the problem. But if that was on land and hunters were scraping through forests back and forth, and parts of the Irish Sea were trawled 3 times every year. Parts of 50% of the Celtic Sea inshore waters is trawled at some point or other. If that was happening on land, we'd be able to see with our eyes.
Yeah.
You can't do this, and but it isn't. So this is why you know, we get onto the notion of marine protected areas, which is probably the single biggest initiative to try and conserve parts of the ocean. So, you know, the damage is, you know, there's a friend of mine, Killing Road, and he's a naturalist and a brilliant, very brilliant naturalist. And he said, you know, once to be a naturalist is to be perennially heartbroken, because all of these stories end up in misery and depression. You start to talk about, you know, bottom trawling as an example there, and you just end up thinking, oh my God, why can't we stop that? And all the damage we've done. So,
well, I suppose the other aspect of that, Ken, is that like for certain, we need policy change and like systems change and the protected areas. But like, I mean, ultimately I'm a big believer in systemic change rather than apportioning all the blame onto individual habits. Like, you know, it's the whole thing about recycling your waste versus while some company is dumping all their crap en masse down the road and you're saving your milk carton. But there is the kind of consumer behavior aspect as well. Like we're pretty much, I suppose we were pescatarian, if you like, in our house, and you know, just eat a little bit of fish every week. Other than that, it's kind of plant-based. But like it has been since watching Seaspiracy that we've really had to reflect on eating fish, you know, and like even on a health level, what's in the fish now, that what humanity has done to the sea, that we're now eating back our own dirt. You know,
yeah, to a greater or less, to some degree. There are some question marks over Seaspiracy.
Figured that. I mean, it's pretty intense blanket bombing facts. You know, I get that.
Yeah, people ask me what I think of it, and I just say, you know, if you want to go to bed miserable and depressed, and you know, watch Seaspiracy. Look, there's a lot of stuff in it that is widely known. That, you know, I've been telling a lot of those stories for 16 years. I just didn't have the 100 million people on Netflix watching it. You know, we've talked about all the troubles with sharks and dolphins being killed and bycatch and poisoned and toxification and all of these issues. But so a lot of it is very good. The problem is that the guy, in many cases, quite a few cases, he overstates his case. And when you overstate your case in an argument, you can tend to lose credibility. We don't need to end fishing. We don't need to end commercial fishing. Fishing is interminably complex. We need to stop fishing in lots of areas, in lots of ways. We need to manage it a lot better. It needs to be regulated. There are, you know, very, very powerful financial interests. In some cases, good. In other cases, maybe not so good. That it needs to be managed. Quite a few statistics, I think, that about the plastics in the ocean that are simply incorrect, and from papers that were never peer-reviewed. But plastics in the ocean is a huge problem. Overfishing is the biggest problem in the ocean. Absolutely, anybody tells you something else is wrong. We're taking too much out of the ocean, and that needs to be tackled. And it's something I'm forever doing. You know, I write to government ministers, I try to lobby for policy change, and as much as you can, and create education and awareness. I think I was saying 18 sections of our last documentary are now on the junior cycle curriculum, you know, which actually took 5 years to give it away for free, but I'm so delighted that we did. And you know, so now Irish teenagers are watching these stories and seeing them in a local context, you know, like for example, the value of ecotourism to coastal communities where fisheries is in decline, like here in North Clare and West Clare, that, you know, ecotourism, for example, surfing, but, you know, sea kayaking, exploring, what is it they call it? I don't know, when you're jumping off cliffs and you're swimming here, or you're snorkeling, or there's some technical name for it. Scuba diving, you know, there's so much potential for that. I mean, there's 140 resident bottlenose dolphins in the Shannon Estuary. You can go there any day of the year to see them. They're resident, and you're looking at a wild animal in a wild animals environment doing what it should be doing. So it is very depressing. I don't think we need to stop eating seafood, but I do think we just need to try and ascertain, whatever way you can, if it's coming from a sustainable fishery source. And please don't buy fish-based pet food for your pets. Please don't do that. It is an ecological disaster. Anyhow, I won't stop there.
I knew nothing about that, so you've certainly enlightened me around the pet food thing. I didn't know anything about that.
Okay, well here's one situation just to describe to you. You know, sprat are a very small fish, about the size of my thumb, and they're deemed to be not valuable enough commercially for there to be a quota. In other words, you know, mackerel have a quota, a total allowable catch, and it's divided out among EU countries. How much can you catch every year? How much? And they try to, the scientists come up with a maximum sustainable yield. And they say you can catch this much this year, and then the politicians get involved and it gets upped. For sprat, there's nothing like that, and because fishermen can go out and catch as much as they want. Now, here's a layer between plankton, which are tiny, tiny microscopic animals and plants. You have fish like sprat, bait fish, and then bigger fish that feed on the sprat, and whales and dolphins, right? But fishermen go out and they just catch 2-3 times the amount that any scientists that have looked at it, international scientists, said Ireland should only catch this much, 2,500 tons a year. Last year we got 14,000 tons. Fishermen are getting €150 ton for sprat, €150 ton. Now, bearing in mind, mackerel or something like 900 euro per ton. You know, rubbish is actually traded commercially at €140 a ton. It makes no sense to take that out of the ecosystem. And then on my phone, I get these little ads for my dog food, individually frozen sprats. Best nutrition for your dog.
Yeah, so why
€6
you
a kilo. Sorry, €6 a kilo,
those?
€6,000 a ton.
Is the algorithm targeting you because it knows you have pets?
No, because I've been searching for sprat.
Okay, right.
€6,000 a ton pet food company selling the sprat for that the fisherman's getting 150. That is costing the ecosystem billions and billions. You know, humpback whales used to come to West Cork every winter for 15, 16 years. There's been none for the last 3 years because the sprat is fished out.
I suppose, like, ultimately, Ken, what that suggests to me is that it's part of the need for almost ecological economics, you know, where we look at the true cost of anything, whether it be farming or industry. Everything is measured in harmony with its true extraction point or value to the earth. Is it giving, taking, or is it sustainable or not? And like, as you said, with what's going on under the sea, we don't see it. But often, like, the value of anything, including the laptop I'm using or microphone I'm using, we don't see where the chip has come from, war-torn Congo or wherever it is. Like, we need to actually own up to what's going on and then make our choices on that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I mean it can be overwhelming, you know.
Yeah, it is.
Where do you stop? Because as you said, your computer, my phone, you know, the power that charged my phone came from a coal burning electricity station in Moneypoint. You know, every time you use your phone, it's using communications infrastructure around the internet, you know, which is powered by electricity, and data centers are a massive consumer of electricity now. Which might be okay if we had, you know, more green electricity. So yeah, look, you can get overwhelmed with this stuff. I think you can only do as much as you can do, and try to do your best to think about how you live your daily life in terms of the impact that that's having on the planet and on the animals. And and don't buy fish-based pet food, please.
Definitely don't buy fish-based pet food. I do find that sense of overwhelm or guilt or any of those kind of emotions that people may be feeling about the state of the world or the state of their neighborhood or their town or their country. For me, one of the best, or one remedy for that, or partial remedy, is to channel it into some form of action or activism. And, you know, filmmaking being one form, but like, it could be songwriting, it could be poetry, it could be writing. Like, I do believe that everybody has some sort of gift, talent, skill, or ability, like the ability to make a phone call, for instance. Just channel the emotions towards something, which I believe that activism can be a creative force as well, you know, for change. So it's you know, rather than internalizing these things, it's like, I guess, to see creativity as this kind of, as a therapeutic force as well. But, you know, because like there are so many mental health benefits to it as well. I'm not suggesting that we should just get involved in creativity to make ourselves happier, but, you know, so what if it's a benefit?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's multi-benefit, if that's a term, to do that kind of thing. But in terms of helping environmental issues, you know, of course, creativity can be fantastic, and but I mean, I'm really inspired to see so many people doing beach cleans now, you know, and picking up other people's litter and just saying, look, you know, rather than berating and saying, oh, a certain kind of person left that here, just pick it up and bring it home. I do it all the time. I pick up stuff and bring it home when I'm out walking, and just get on with it. And I feel kind of better, and I'm doing a little bit of good for that. But you know, articulations like that can be fantastic. I do a lot of work with the Green Schools Initiative on Tashka, and they do fantastic work. They organise a lot of the beach cleans, but they do the kind of Green Schools Award, which they reward schools that have made really, you know, for particular efforts in terms of environmental initiatives that they've done in school. And it was in Galway, it's probably 2019 now, because it was pre-COVID. So every year they have a conference and schools come and they put stuff on display. And they asked me to talk about marine plastics, and I did. And I was doing a series of 3 or 4. And after the first one, a couple of the teachers came up and they said, Ken, they actually know all that. They know it. And they brought me in to see these incredible sculptures that kids had made out of plastics they'd collected on the seashore. I mean, they were like whale sculptures made of fantastic stuff, you know, and dolphins and sharks and all the kinds of stuff. I had to kind of, you know, it was so encouraging to see that the baseline knowledge has come up, you know, thanks to Blue Planet and hopefully our own work and all the other filmmakers and people that are creating awareness of this stuff. So yeah, there's a classic example of combining creativity with you know, delivering a message and feeling like you're doing something about it.
Brilliant. Brilliant. If you had, just to finish up, Ken, if you had a kind of, if I was to give you all the funding you wanted in the world, what would you like to make?
I'd be miserable. You know that, Rory. Too much money to make you miserable.
Okay, cancelled.
Oh, you know, I mean, I'm a blessed man in so many ways. I'm blessed man, I should say. You know, I love what I'm doing, and if I can just, you know, keep getting projects funded, you know, I just love what I'm doing at the moment. It's intensely difficult, and you know, at the moment we're making another Atlantic series, and 7 out of 10 days we go to sea, we're finding nothing. You know, it's intensely difficult, and the logistics are getting there. But I love doing what I'm doing, and I feel like it's doing some good for the world, and I'm not, you know, not rising above my station. I don't have delusions of self-grandeur to any degree at all. I'm a very humble person, I think, and but I love doing what I'm doing, and if I can just get enough money to keep making those and to make enough of a living, and you know, it's very costly, and you compete with the likes of the BBCs and big iconic series which have 1.5 to 2 million euro per episode, and go to, you know, they don't go west of Clare to film Wales because it's too difficult and its conditions are too so.
Yeah,
you know, this is where I come from, and it means so much more to me to tell stories from here than it would be to go to the tropics and film beautiful wildlife. So you know, I'm quite happy if I can just keep going as I am. I'm very happy with that.
Great. Well, really, I for one hugely appreciate all you're doing, Ken, and thank you for the great work, and I wish you great success with it. And I'd encourage everyone to check out your book as well. Where can people get your book?
I don't know if it's still in bookshops, but it's just called Stories from the Deep. It's published by Gill, and I think a quick Google will tell you where you can find it. Certainly Ennis Bookshop and the H Bookshop have been very good. They sold a lot of them, kept them. Probably not in mainstream bookshops anymore because I'm not that well known. But a quick Google, you'll find it. There's still plenty of copies in circulation. Right. Stories from the Deep by Gill.
And go and buy your documentaries wherever people can, and support the work wherever you can, and go make all your own work. So thanks for listening and watching, everyone, and thanks to Creative Ireland for supporting the podcast. And check out the archives and share Ken's great story and great work wherever you can, and rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. And a huge thanks to Ken once again. Thank you, Ken.
Not at all. Thanks for having me. All the best. Mind yourself.
Thank you.